What if the woman who saved your child's life was also the key to uncovering a past you never knew existed? Asterisk, the rain had been falling for 3 straight days, just like the crying inside the house. Thunder rolled quietly over the hills, behind the Mercer estate, but nothing compared to the storm inside. Room after room, hallway after hallway, after hallway, every inch of the grand mansion felt haunted by a single piercing sound, the desperate wails of a baby girl named Sophie. Daniel Mercer stood outside the nursery door, shoulders tense, tie loosened, the polished surface of his phone screen still glowing from the last call yet. Another nanny, politely resigning. That made 7 in 4 days. Each one had left with the same look, compassion mixed with exhaustion, and a hint of fear. Daniel couldn't blame them. His daughter's grief was not just loud. It was something deeper, something no bottle or lullaby had been able to reach. She was crying for someone who wasn't coming back. Inside, Sophie's tiny frame trembled in her crib. She cried, not with the cries of a hungry child, but with the heartbreak of someone who had lost more than words could say. And maybe she had. Her mother, Amelia, Daniel's wife, had passed away only weeks ago during childbirth. The same night, Sophie entered the world. Amelia left it. Daniel hadn't yet found the courage to explain that to himself, much less his daughter. The house staff, once bustling, now moved quietly, cautiously, as if afraid even their footsteps might make things worse. Daniel had tried everything. Infant therapists, pediatric specialists, even sleep experts flown in from across the country. Nothing worked. Sophie screamed like the pain was inside her bones, and all Daniel could do was listen. That was when she arrived, not in a town car, not with a clipboard, not with an entourage of credentials or degrees, just one woman, early 30s, maybe younger, stepping through the Mercer gates with a small suitcase and an umbrella that looked like it had weathered 100 storms. Her name was Alina Cross. Daniel hadn't hired her himself. His assistant had found her through an agency that specialized in high-urgency placements. There wasn't even a photo in her file, just a one-line note. Comes highly recommended, quiet but effective. At first glance she looked ordinary, not unkempt, not flashy, just calm, centered. There was something in her eyes that had seen things and survived. She smiled politely when she was introduced to Daniel, and didn't flinch at the sound of Sophie's cries echoing down the marble hall. "You've read the file?" Daniel asked, almost hoping she'd turn around and leave like the others. Alina nodded. "I don't need the file to understand a hurting child." It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. Not the kind that brags, but the kind that's walked through fire and still came out clean. She took off her coat slowly, revealing simple, professional clothes. Then, she picked up her small suitcase and stepped toward the nursery door. "You're sure you want to try?" Daniel asked again. She paused, not trying, just showing up. He had no answer to that, only watched as she turned the brass handle and walked inside. The wailing was sharp, almost painful to hear. Sophie's tiny fists were clenched, her cheeks flushed red with effort and grief. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, expecting Alina to do what every other nanny had done: shush and bounce, fuss and fail. But she didn't. She walked slowly toward the crib, placed her suitcase gently on the floor, and knelt beside Sophie. Without saying a word, her fingers curled softly around the baby's hand. Then, she did something that made Daniel's chest tighten. She began to hum. It wasn't a nursery rhyme, not a modern lullaby. It was an old tune, raw, aching, threaded, with sorrow and comfort at once. A song that didn't just fill the room, it filled the silence between heartbeats. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. He knew that melody. So did his wife. He had only heard it once before, years ago, when Amelia was rocking in the porch swing, pregnant and glowing, humming quietly as the sun dipped behind the trees. He remembered teasing her, asking where she'd learned it. She smiled and said, "It's from a story my family never talks about." I just remembered the song. But that memory was buried so deep, Daniel hadn't recalled it until this very moment. Now, Alina was humming it, exactly the same way, same key, same pacing, same raw emotion woven into every note. Sophie stopped crying. The silence that followed was not empty, it was thick, full, electric. Alina lifted Sophie gently into her arms, still humming, and slowly rocked her back and forth. The baby's breathing slowed. Her eyelids drooped. Then, for the first time in 3 days, she slept. Daniel didn't realize he had been holding his breath. He looked at Alina, standing there in the half-light with his daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, and felt something shift in his chest. Relief, yes. Gratitude, of course, but something else too. Recognition. That song wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. He stepped inside. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice quieter than he expected. Alina looked at him carefully. Then, down at the child in her arms, "A woman used to sing it to me, a very long time ago." But she didn't answer right away. She just placed Sophie back into the crib, tucking her in with practiced tenderness. Then, still facing the crib, she said, "Let's just say, she was someone I lost, someone I came here hoping to find." Daniel's mind raced, but before he could ask another question, Alina added softly, "She had the same eyes as Sophie." He didn't sleep that night, not because Sophie was crying. She wasn't. Not because the house was busy, it wasn't. But because for the first time since Amelia died, Daniel felt something more confusing than grief. He felt the beginning of a question. Who was Alina Cross? And why, when she hummed, did it sound like Amelia was still alive? The rain had stopped by morning, but the questions hadn't. Daniel Mercer stood at the kitchen window, staring out over the dew-covered garden that Amelia used to love so much. Sunlight spilled across the hedges and touched the iron benches, where they once sat together, planning Sophie's nursery, choosing baby names, dreaming of a future now forever missing its center. And yet, Sophie was asleep, peacefully, for hours. A miracle that not even the most expensive experts could deliver. But a stranger named Alina Cross had walked into his home and managed it with nothing more than a melody and a mysterious calm. He hadn't asked her to stay the night, yet she was still here, sipping tea at the edge of the breakfast nook, as if she belonged, not in an entitled way, in a quiet, matter-of-fact way, like she knew the house better than she should. She hadn't asked for a guest room or inquired about work hours. She simply took the smallest cup, filled it halfway, and sat near the window where Sophie's cries had once echoed the loudest. Daniel watched her, and he noticed something he hadn't the night before. Alina's hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking, not from fear, from memory. He stepped into the room and she greeted him with a soft nod. "She's still sleeping," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I know," he replied. "I checked, twice." Alina gave the smallest smile and sipped her tea again. He sat across from her, carefully. "You knew that lullaby," he said quietly. "I did," she answered, not avoiding his eyes this time. "My wife used to hum it, only once, but I remember," she said. "It came from somewhere in her past, something her family wouldn't talk about." Alina didn't respond, but the flicker in her eyes told him everything. It was the silence of someone who had heard stories too painful to repeat. Daniel leaned forward. "Alina, did you know Amelia?" There was a bitter moment, long enough for a lie to slip in, but she didn't lie. She just whispered, not in the way she should have been known. "But yes, I knew of her." He tried to read her, but it was like staring into a story written in invisible ink. Everything about Alina felt like it meant something. Her presence, her gentleness with Sophie, even the way she moved through the house as if guided by echoes. "Tell me the truth," Daniel said, voice low. "Why are you really here?" Alina's hand paused over her teacup, and for a moment, it seemed like she might retreat again. But then she placed the cup down, slowly, carefully, as though it held something fragile. She turned her gaze to him, and said, "Because sometimes the only way to find peace is to go back to where the silence began." Daniel blinked. "I don't understand. You will." That answer was maddening, but something in her tone stopped him from pushing further. Instead, he asked, "Did Amelia know you existed?" Alina lowered her eyes. "I don't think so." Daniel sat back, stunned by the honesty in her voice. No games, no performance, just pain wrapped in grace. Later that day, he found her in the nursery, not tending to Sophie, but simply sitting on the floor beside the crib, softly humming. Again, this time, it was a different tune, something even older. He watched from the doorway, unnoticed, and he noticed that her eyes were wet. "Alina," he said gently. She looked up, startled, not because he caught her, but because something had broken through in her. "She smiled at me today," she said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Sophie." Just for a moment, he felt his throat tighten. "She hasn't smiled since Amelia." "I know," she whispered. "You're doing something no one else could do." She shook her head. I'm just giving her what I wish someone gave me." That sentence clung to him like fog. Every word made him more certain that Elena's arrival wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a job, it was a return to what he didn't yet know. But that night, when he passed by the guest room she had quietly claimed, the door was slightly open. A sliver of lamplight spilled into the hallway, and on the small writing desk near the window, he saw something that made his heart skip. A photo, faded, curled at the edges. Two young girls, maybe 7 or 8 years old, barefoot in a field. One of them unmistakably Amelia, the other, Elena. He hadn't seen that photo before. Amelia never showed it to him. And yet there it was, on Elena's desk, framed with care. He stepped back, heart pounding, careful not to make a sound. This wasn't just a woman with a talent for calming babies. This was someone connected by blood, by memory, and by something far more powerful than coincidence. Elena Cross had walked into his home a stranger, but she carried a piece of his past, and maybe, just maybe, a piece of the future Sophie had lost. The answers were coming. He could feel them building beneath the surface like an incoming tide, but he had no idea how deep they would go, or what they might wash away. The next morning arrived without warning. Daniel had barely slept. His mind turned in circles, looping through fragments of memories he once thought were settled. Amelia's voice, that forgotten photograph, the lullaby, and Elena always, Elena now, at the center of everything, without ever asking to be. When he found her in the sunroom, she was already awake, barefoot on the cold tile floor, swaying slowly with Sophie in her arms. Morning light filtered through the glass like melted gold, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch through time itself. Sophie was quiet against content in a way that Daniel still couldn't fully understand. He watched for a moment, then cleared his throat. "You didn't tell me that you knew her when you were children." Elena didn't startle. She simply turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "No," she said, "I didn't." Daniel frowned. "But that picture," she nodded slowly, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "I didn't know her, not really, but I knew of her, because she was the one they chose." Daniel stepped further into the room, unsure what she meant. Chose? Chose for what? Elena kissed the top of Sophie's head before placing her gently in the bassinet to stay. Now he was even more lost. "What are you talking about?" Elena sat down in the rocking chair, her hands resting in her lap like she was trying to hold something invisible together. "When I was a baby," she began softly, "I was placed in foster care. I don't know the whole story, no one ever told it clearly. But what I know is this. 2 baby girls were born into the same family. One of them was adopted. The other was left behind." Daniel felt the air shift, colder now, heavier. "I was the one they left," she said. Silence. It came like thunder, loud in the quiet, impossible to deny. He sat down slowly across from her. "You're saying Amelia was your sister?" "I'm saying," Elena replied, eyes steady on his, "that I was hers." The words knocked something loose in Daniel. He thought of all the times he had watched Amelia stare out at nothing, lost in thoughts she wouldn't share. He remembered the way she avoided conversations about her childhood, the rare moments when she seemed on the verge of revealing something, but never quite did. "My God," he whispered, "she didn't." No, Elena said. "She didn't." Daniel leaned forward, heart thudding. "Then how did you find out?" Elena paused. "When Amelia passed, I saw her obituary, her photo, the name. There was something about it, about her, that felt like looking in a mirror that reflected, not your face, but your soul. I started digging. I called people who didn't want to be called. I traced the adoption records that had been sealed, and eventually, I found the truth." She held up a small chain from her pocket. On the end of it was a locket, worn and tarnished, but still intact. "She had one," Elena said, opening it slowly. "I had the other." Inside was a tiny scrap of paper, barely legible from age. "My girls, no matter where you go, always find your way back." Daniel stared. "Amelia wore one like that. She never took it off." Elena's voice dropped. "They were made for twins." The room was quiet again, but this silence was different. Not the silence of grief, but the silence of something being rewritten. Daniel stood, pacing now. "I don't understand. If you were twins, why wouldn't the family keep you both?" "They didn't believe they could," she said gently. "They were young, poor, scared, and someone convinced them that splitting us up would give us both a chance. One would have the life they couldn't offer. The other would survive however she could. Daniel felt sick. That's not a choice. That's a punishment. It was reality, Alina said. And it created two very different women, one who knew love, and one who had to learn it the hard way. He looked at her now not as a mystery, not as a miracle worker, but as someone carved out of pain and strength, someone who hadn't come here to be a nanny. She had come to reclaim something stolen from her long before she had words for loss. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked. "Because I didn't want to force myself into your lives. I didn't come to make claims. I came to hold what I never got to hold, just for a little while." Daniel swallowed hard. "Sophie, I'm not here to confuse her," Alina said softly, "but she's the last piece of my sister, and maybe, in some way, the first piece of me I've ever truly known." He turned toward the bassinet. Sophie stirred slightly in her sleep, her little fist curling around nothing. But Daniel saw it differently now. "She needs you," he said. "More than I knew." Alina didn't speak, but she stood, walked to the window, and whispered more to herself than to him. "I needed her first." In that moment, Daniel understood. This wasn't just a reunion. This was restoration, of love, of family, of what was lost and might finally be found. But he also knew something deeper was still buried, because secrets don't just vanish when the truth comes to light. Sometimes, they cast longer shadows, and he couldn't shake the feeling. This story wasn't over. Not yet. By the time the first autumn leaves began to fall outside, the house had changed, not in decoration or structure, but in energy. There was a softness, now a quiet pulse of warmth, threading through the hallways, where grief once clung like smoke. It had been 2 weeks since Elena's revelation, and somehow, Daniel hadn't told anyone. Not his sister, not his lawyer, not even the few close friends who had offered help since Amelia's passing. He hadn't said a word, not because he didn't believe it, but because he did too much, and part of him feared that saying it out loud would unravel something sacred. He watched Alina more closely now, not out of suspicion, but out of awe. The way she moved with Sophie, the instinct in her touch, the near telepathic understanding she seemed to share with the baby, it was no longer coincidence. It was connection, blood, maybe, or something deeper. That morning, he found Alina in Amelia's old studio. The room had been closed for months, dust settling on unfinished canvases and jars of dried paint. But now it was filled with light. Alina had opened the curtains. A breeze filtered in through the half-cracked window. She was standing in front of an easel, not painting, just remembering. Daniel stepped inside quietly. "You opened the studio." She didn't turn. It felt like the right time. He moved beside her. The canvas was blank, but her fingers were stained with charcoal. There were soft smudges on her sleeves, like she'd tried and erased something over and over. "She used to hum when she worked," he said, trying to steady his voice. "Always the same melody." "The lullaby," Alina whispered. "Yes." They stood there, two people bound by love for someone gone, but not entirely. Alina finally turned to face him. "I found something in the attic last night." He blinked. "You went into the attic?" "I couldn't sleep," she said. "Something kept tugging at me. I followed it." Daniel crossed his arms. "What did you find?" She handed him a small wooden box, the kind that locked with a simple clasp. It looked old, handcrafted, the wood worn from years of touch. He opened it slowly. Inside were a few letters, folded delicately and tied with a pale ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope was unmistakable. "Amelia." He read the first line, froze. "To the sister I never got to meet." Daniel's breath caught. "She knew," he whispered. Alina nodded. Somewhere inside, she must have always known, or felt it. Maybe she didn't know the full truth, but enough to write to someone she'd never met, and still call them family. There were 3 letters, all written in different ink, different moods, one joyful, one sorrowful, one pleading. Daniel couldn't read more than a few lines before his vision blurred. The last letter's date stunned him. It was written just a week before Amelia passed. "If anything ever happens to me," it read, "I hope she finds this. I hope she knows I never stopped wondering, never stopped hoping, and if she ever shows up, let her in. Please, let her in." Daniel closed the box slowly. His hands were trembling. "Why didn't she tell me?" he asked, more to the air than to Alina. "Maybe she didn't know how," Alina said gently. "Or maybe she was protecting us both from the weight of the truth." That evening, Daniel lit the fireplace for the first time in months. Alina sat nearby, rocking Sophie to sleep. The letters lay on the coffee table between them, now a bridge instead of a barrier. Elena looked up. "There's more, you know." He raised an eyebrow. "More than being Amelia's sister." She hesitated, then nodded. "The agency that sent me here. I didn't contact them." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" "I didn't apply for this job. I didn't send a resume. I didn't even know where you lived until 3 days before I arrived." He stood slowly, his pulse quickening. "Eleanor, how did you get here?" She looked down at Sophie, who was now asleep again in her arms, then back at Daniel. "I received a letter," she said. He stepped closer. "From who?" She reached into her coat pocket and handed him a folded piece of parchment. The paper was thick, yellowed at the edges. Familiar handwriting graced the front dot. It was Amelia's. Daniel opened it with shaking hands. "If you're reading this, it means you're ready, or close to it. I've made arrangements. One day, she come. Don't be afraid. You'll know her not by name, but by the way Sophie sleeps in her arms." Daniel looked up, stunned. "She planned this," he said. "All of it," Elena whispered. "She was giving us back to each other." Everything felt upside down. Or maybe, for the first time in a long time, right side up. But just as he was about to speak, the doorbell rang. He frowned. "Are you expecting anyone?" Elena shook her head. "No." Daniel walked to the front door and opened it slowly. A man stood there, mid-50s, stern face, eyes that didn't blink easily. "Daniel Mercer?" he asked. "Yes." The man held out a leather-bound folder. "I represent an estate connected to Amelia Harrison. I'm here to discuss a sealed inheritance and an unresolved custody clause." Daniel took the folder slowly, confused. "What custody clause?" The man didn't blink. "Elena Cross was named as Sophie's secondary guardian, effective upon your inability or unfitness to continue parenting alone." Daniel's heart sank. "What?" The man's voice was firm. "It's all in her will. It was amended 6 months before her death." Daniel turned, eyes wide. Elena was standing, now, still holding Sophie, her face pale, lips parted in disbelief. "I didn't know," she whispered. Neither of them did, but someone had known Amelia, and she had set something in motion, far bigger than any of them could have imagined. Daniel stared at the document as if it might suddenly vanish, like a dream too strange to be real. But it didn't. The weight of the folder in his hands felt like a judgment, one he hadn't asked for, and one he didn't know how to answer. Elena stood frozen by the staircase, Sophie cradled against her shoulder, her breath shallow and unsure. The quiet between them was so thick it muffled even the ticking of the grandfather clock down the hall. Outside, the wind was rising, scattering brittle leaves across the stone path. Change in motion. "May I come in?" the man asked, still at the doorway, his expression professional but unreadable. Daniel stepped aside silently, his eyes never leaving Elena's. The man moved into the foyer, his shoes leaving faint echoes on the polished floor. He placed the leather folder on the nearby console table and opened it with practiced precision. A thick stack of papers sat inside, each one neatly tabbed and marked. "This," the man said calmly, "is a secondary guardianship document drafted by Mrs. Amelia Harrison 6 months prior to her passing. At the time, she made several updates to her estate plan, most notably naming a person she referred to as Elena Cross as an alternative guardian should the court deem Mr. Daniel Mercer incapable, temporarily or permanently, of providing stable care for the child." "Incapable," Daniel finally snapped, his voice quiet but sharp. On what grounds? The man didn't flinch. "Grief, unstable work hours, emotional distress, mental health. The language is open to interpretation. That's why the clause was marked for activation only upon court review or certain events that Amelia believed might unfold." Elena's voice cut through the air, soft and shaking. "I didn't know about this. I didn't ask for any of it." "I believe you," Daniel said, though his voice carried more confusion than certainty. The man flipped a few pages and pointed to a handwritten note in the margin. "If I'm gone, and Elena is found, let her help. Let her love Sophie the way I never got to love her. She is family, even if she doesn't know it yet. And if Daniel ever forgets how to breathe, let her remind him." Daniel felt something inside him twist. Grief, yes, but more than that, guilt. Had he been so buried in his own mourning that he hadn't seen Sophie's needs clearly? Had Amelia? Elena looked away, her eyes misted. "I thought I came here to meet a part of my past." not to take anything from anyone. You're not taking anything, Daniel said quickly. You're filling something. I just didn't know it yet. The man cleared his throat. There is, however, an additional complication. Daniel turned sharply. Of course there is. The estate Amelia left behind, her paintings, her studio, her private letters, those were meant to remain within the family line. Legally, the court may view you as her husband and guardian of Sophie, but if Alina is proven to be Amelia's biological sister, he paused, she has rights, not just emotional, but legal. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're saying this could become a legal fight? Possibly, unless both parties come to a private agreement. Alina set Sophie down gently in the crib beside her. I don't want the estate, or the money. I only came to know her, to hold the baby once, maybe twice. The man looked at her carefully. Then I suggest we settle it that way, informally. But you both need to understand the media may become interested. The revelation of a long-lost twin, the estate of a renowned artist, the inheritance of a child. It's compelling. Daniel muttered under his breath. It's a circus. The man gave a tight smile, one that often comes without tickets. After he left, the house returned to silence. But now it was a louder silence, one full of unspoken decisions. Alina sat across from Daniel at the dining table, the fire casting flickering gold along the walls. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she asked, "What do you want to do?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He stared at the tiny footprint etched into the plaster on the mantel. Sophie's, done the day she was born. Amelia had insisted on making it. I want her to grow up with peace, he said. Not court battles, not headlines, not uncertainty. I want that too, but I also want you here, he added. Alina looked up sharply. You bring something into this home that I didn't realize was missing, he continued. Not just for Sophie, for me. You remind me of her, not because you look like Amelia, but because you carry the same fire, the same patience, the same soul. I'm not trying to replace her, Alina whispered. I know, that's why it matters. Then, something unexpected happened. Sophie stirred in the crib and began to cry, not the panicked wail of before, but a sharper, almost urgent sob. Alina rose without hesitation and crossed the room. But before she reached Sophie, Daniel stood. Let me. He bent over the crib and lifted Sophie with practiced hands. She blinked up at him, her tiny fists clenching his shirt. He held her close, kissed her forehead, and slowly began to hum the lullaby, Amelia's lullaby. Sophie quieted almost instantly. Alina watched, her heart caught in her throat. You're doing it, she whispered. You're breathing. Daniel looked up at her. So are you. They stood in silence for a long moment, neither needing to speak. The walls between them, made of old pain and new revelations, had begun to crumble, and just when it felt like something solid was finally forming between them, the phone rang. Daniel picked it up. Mr. Mercer, a voice said on the other end. This is Detective Rowan from the St. Augustine Police Department. We need to speak with you regarding a recent inquiry into Amelia Harrison's records. Something's come up. Something we think you need to see in person. Daniel's heart stopped. What kind of something? There was a pause. We believe your wife's death may not have been as straightforward as it seemed. He looked at Alina. And for the first time since she'd entered his life, Daniel wasn't afraid of her presence. He was afraid of what came next. The next morning arrived, with an unease that neither coffee nor morning light could dissolve. Clouds clung low over the hills, casting shadows on the Mercer estate that seemed heavier than usual, as if the house itself sensed the storm that was coming. Daniel stood at the edge of Amelia's studio, the letter from Detective Rowan still echoing in his head. Her death may not have been as straightforward as it seemed. The words gnawed at him all night. He had replayed that final morning 100 times. Amelia, walking into the woods with her sketchpad, her peaceful smile at breakfast, the way she kissed Sophie's forehead like it would be the last time. And now, it haunted him in a way he couldn't explain. Alina entered the room quietly, her presence a comfort now, though her face reflected the same gnawing tension. She held Sophie, who gurgled innocently, unaware of the undertow of suspicion swirling around her mother's memory. Are you going? Alina asked. Daniel nodded. I need to know. I'll come with you. No, he said softly. Stay with Sophie. If this is what I think it might be, I don't know where it will lead, but I don't want her pulled into it. Alina hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. At the station, Detective Rowan greeted him with a grim expression. The man was in his early 40s, with eyes that missed nothing, and a demeanor that revealed just enough empathy to feel trustworthy. "I appreciate you coming," Rowan said, motioning for Daniel to sit. "I know this isn't easy. Just tell me what you found." The detective placed a folder on the desk and opened it to a series of photographs Amelia's sketchpad. Torn pages, inks, but it was one particular drawing that froze Daniel in place. It was a portrait, rough but unmistakable. Alina. Drawn weeks before Amelia's death. "I don't understand," Daniel said. Rowan leaned forward. "Your wife had never met this woman, correct?" "No, not to my knowledge." "And yet, she drew her, multiple times, in different moods. Alone, holding a baby, standing near the lake, always from memory or from something deeper." Daniel's voice cracked. "Why would she do that?" Rowan didn't answer immediately. He handed Daniel a second envelope. This was found tucked into the back of her sketchpad, hidden. "We only discovered it after the recent estate inventory request prompted a deeper review." Daniel opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single-page letter. "To whoever finds this, if anything happens to me, know that I've been watched, not by a stranger, but by my past. The face I keep drawing is one I don't remember fully, but my heart does. I don't know her name, only that she's mine. My sister, the one they never told me about. She's coming. And when she does, trust her. But if something happens before I can find her, know that I've been followed, watched. There's someone I couldn't protect myself from. If I'm gone, it wasn't an accident." Daniel looked up, his voice barely a whisper. She knew. Rowan nodded. "We cross-referenced the name she used, Elena Cross, with hospital records from 30 years ago. There's a paper trail, faint, but real. 2 birth certificates from the same hospital, same day, Amelia and a second baby. The second record was sealed. We're still trying to find out why." Daniel slumped in the chair, overwhelmed. "Someone erased her sister from history. Someone," Rowan said carefully, "with influence. Amelia came from a wealthy lineage. It's possible her parents here in-laws had reasons to hide the truth." Daniel's mind reeled back to every cold glance, every controlling phone call, every subtle attempt by Amelia's parents to steer their lives. Rowan handed him one last piece of evidence. A security photo, blurry, black and white but unmistakable. A figure standing outside the estate gate, late at night. Not Alina. But her resemblance was uncanny. "Who is that?" Daniel asked. "We don't know. But she visited twice the week before Amelia died. Never came through the gate, just stood there. We're trying to identify her." Daniel's breath came shorter now. "So what do I do?" "You go home. You keep your daughter safe. And you tell Alina the truth. She deserves it." When Daniel returned home, the sky had shifted. Thunder rolled in the distance. Alina was on the porch, rocking Sophie, watching the wind stir the trees. He sat beside her, eyes heavy. "You were right," he said, "about everything." She looked at him, concerned. "What happened?" "She was looking for you," Daniel whispered, "before she died. She knew you were real. She drew you. She wrote about you. She was afraid, because someone didn't want you found." Elena froze. "Why? I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. And I'm not letting anyone come near Sophie or you." Elena held Sophie tighter, her voice barely audible. "I dreamed about her last night, Amelia. She was sitting by the lake, painting. She looked sad, but at peace." Daniel swallowed hard. "She wanted you here. She made sure of it." Then, something fluttered through the wind and landed on the portrait photograph, old and curled at the edges. Daniel picked it up, his hands trembling. It was a picture of Amelia as a child. Next to her stood a little girl, same age, same face. 2 identical girls. On the back, in Amelia's handwriting, were 3 words: "Find my sister." Daniel looked at Alina. "She didn't just want you to find us," he said. "She wanted you to find the truth." And with that, the real story began, not of grief, but of unraveling secrets, reclaiming family, and facing the ones who tried to bury them both.